It's my great pleasure to bring up one of our leaders here from Primer, and to talk to you a little bit about John before he comes up, and he's going to introduce the folks he's got on his panel, which is an absolutely crackerjack panel. But John's our VP of Data Science at Primer up in San Francisco. He came down today, and John has had an extraordinary career. John is a Fulbright scholar. He was a visiting scholar at both Harvard's med school and engineering school. He actually embedded in Afghanistan with the NATO Civilian Casualty Data Science team. Was also a visiting postdoc at Berkeley Institute for Data Science, and all the while spent about 15 years as a journalist, where he became increasingly interested in and focused on data science. He also has a PhD from Oxford in my favorite subject, molecular biology, and he and his team are doing so much of the work really kind of at the coalface of emerging technology. What's going on with the large language models, the smaller models, what's happening with all of the open source work, and figuring out how we can best leverage that at Primer and get the best of present capabilities in the hands of customers so they can be more effective in their jobs. So it's my great pleasure to have John come up, introduce his panel, and take us into this next bit of the session.
Okay, this is gonna be fun. So I've been a scientist my whole life, but I took a big detour, anyway I want, as an investigative journalist. And indeed, in Afghanistan, that's where I really intimately got to know people in service. A very life-changing thing for me. But I'm back to being a scientist, leading scientists at a company, and trying to use this new magic stuff called AI. And from a data science perspective, it's just a new set of tools, but it is really extraordinary. And I do wake up every day pinching myself that I have found myself at a company that is actually, not just doing research on this stuff, but deploying it. The stuff we build is getting used. What a time to be alive. So I hate panels. So we talked in advance, and we said, let's not do it like a panel. Let's have a real conversation. So you're going to be involved. I need you to step up and actually think of some things you want to ask. Or even just say, my job is going to be monologue policeman. So I'm just going to stop anyone who...
Use ChatGPT to figure out a question.
Well, you should have done that in advance. But these folks here are extraordinary, and they were chosen because they have three crucial perspectives. So the motivating theme for this, let's not call it panel, conversation, is going to be, how do we keep our edge in AI as a country? Coming into this, we wanted to focus on national security. I'm going to crack the door open just a little more. There's more to national security than just the obvious stuff. Keeping your edge when it comes to something like the AI race, is bigger than the obvious stuff. Making a difference in medicine might actually have knock-on effects that you can't predict. So I want to crack that door open a little wider, not just talking about the obvious stuff. But here's why these three folks are here. So and I've got some biographical material, but I'm gonna keep this short. Okay, so representing academia, we've got Mory. So Mory is a master of fluid dynamics. He's found applications throughout his career, both in aerospace, but also in biomedicine. And he's also jumped outside of academia. He's done institution building, kind of like on the side of academia. But he's a hands-on engineer type as well. I recently learned that I don't even know why he did this, but he very famously did an experiment where he tested an idea about how the pyramids might have been constructed in ancient Egypt using kite power. And he actually built the device using the constraints of the time, the materials of the time, and showed that it is indeed possible. And I just had a chat with him. He's still convinced it's actually likely. So not a normal, got some pusher. Okay. So you're going to represent academia, roughly speaking. Then we've got Dave. Dave, the thing that I think is the coolest, just to nerd a bit, is that you're responsible for the correction of spherical aberration on the Hubble telescope. I mean, he's got a long and amazing career. Associate Director for Strategic Integration at JPL. That's the job title. But the cool stuff is in the details, and I've just got tons of it here. That's the one that stood out to me. Have one of our former theoretical physicists, current machine learning engineers here with us from Primer, and we were kind of geeking out on the long list of cool stuff you've built. Okay, so you represent kind of what would you call JPL? It's not the government side per se.
Intersection between academia and industry in many ways.
Yeah, kind of the intersect between the two. And then, to round it off, Ellen, you're the other category. So you're covering venture capital, you're covering the partnership between tech and military and through SIPR programs and trying to make dual use of, both commercial and government applications. And you also have a career before that in the Navy. You would have been the user of the kind of software we built. So kind of the everything person.
Wish I had you back then.
Yeah.
So in advance, I prepared, this is me wearing my journalist hat, a provocative set of questions. So a good conversation starts with some provocation. Let's not be boring. So I've got a provocative question for each of you, and you can choose to ignore it, but if you ignore it, you have to ask your own provocative question of someone else here. So let's get this moving. So again, the goal overall is to really probe how do we stay ahead? It may be the most important technology ever built. A lot of people claim that. It'll be the most impactful. However way this thing slides down the hill, it'll affect all future generations in a way that nothing else before has. So to take it sufficiently seriously, Dave, your provocative question is the JPL model right at all? The thing about AI is that it is moving so much faster than space science. Maybe that model, and I think of DARPA and similar efforts to try and pull innovation out of the world. Maybe that model, which was so great for getting us on the moon and so forth, just might not be the right model at all. Do you want to ask the question, or should I ask all the provocative questions at once?
No.
It's your choice how you want to run the panel.
But I'm going to follow
I
your
just know
judgment.
there's no monologues.
Yeah, I'm going to follow your judgment. What's your gut say?
I'd like to make a few comments. And so, first of all, thank you for having us on the panel, and thank you, Mayor Gordo. And I really resonated with the remarks by the Vice Admiral. I promise I won't have a monologue, but we are launching Europa Clipper. The biggest spacecraft JPL has ever built is launching next Thursday on a Falcon Heavy from Kennedy Space Center, going to one of Jupiter's icy moons called Europa. Very exciting. Period. Moving on. So, JPL is a federal lab. The full name is FFRDC. We're NASA's federal lab. We're the only one that NASA has. The model was set up in World War II, around just before World War II. Actually, it's how the nuclear bomb came to existence. Los Alamos, Sandia, JPL, Caltech. I believe it is the right model for the time. Federal labs were set up to be able to recruit the best and the brightest, and we're operated by Caltech for NASA. And most importantly, to take risk that industry is not going to want to take because there's no value proposition, and take risk on, different types of propulsion, different types of compute, all of that. So I still believe it's the right model. And I just want to echo what the Vice Admiral said about China. I also run the classified work for JPL, so I'm very connected with all of this. But make no mistake, they are playing the long game, as you said, and they are out to change the world order. And we need to put our best foot forward. And I still think the federal lab model is applicable today. Some areas, industries completely taken over, and they should. I think we've gone from 70 federal labs to 40, which is very appropriate. But I think in some cases, still makes a huge amount of sense.
All right, let me come in at an attack angle on one thing you said, which is you need these federal labs when the motivation basically isn't there for commercial to step up. It's you got to build this because we all need it, not because anyone can just make a buck on it. But AI is all about right now making a buck on it. So this kind of leads to your provocative question, which is, can academia still be the epicenter of innovation when all the talent, at least in our industry, in AI, is getting drained away to companies? How do you keep the center of mass of innovation alive and well in academia when everyone's making a buck on this stuff?
I think it's not a provocative question. I'm expecting it, but that's I believe that academia has an important role, and that's education. We have to train people that can be new innovators and creators. So in that respect, I think they are not going to be like that. But in the meantime, part of the progress is that how you, I would say, division of labor, how industry and university can work together. As Caltech is doing, for example, we have AWS in our campus. And it makes us to think about hard and harder problems. Challenges us by having industry mixes. Okay. So I think in that respect, I think very exciting time because we are seeing the generation of students that suddenly they see a challenge that is worth trying. And it's not boring anymore. And that's the important part.
Something you mentioned in a conversation we had earlier was that joint appointments is one way forward. So, marry them together. Let professors have academic positions and industry positions. So keep that center of mass still in the university. But I still feel like there is a new problem potentially with AI, which is that unlike the grand challenges of the past, like, the bomb, going to the moon, where really no company would have ever put their hand up and said, yeah, I can see making a profit on that. Let's charge ahead. Making AI is almost like the last problem. A lot of people see it as like the last thing we will ever build. Everyone is motivated to build this stuff. So here's a provocation in general. Why not just let industry do what industry does? Ellen, you want to take that?
I don't think, yeah. So thanks for having me, by the way, and really nice to meet everyone. I haven't, let me try to answer that question. Why not just let industry do what industry does? I get concerned that the industry is a little bit barbelled. The large companies, we have OpenAI, they're going to go at $150 billion valuation, and then we have Meta, and all these companies, this is industry, have a lot of resources, and then everybody else who's trying to make a buck. Like if you look at Y Combinator classes recently, most of them are AI. It's interesting watching their product development cycle because within 6 months, what idea will win or not. I feel that it'll be, basically the future will be represented by these firms, and then everybody else won't be represented. Like we already have a hard problem or a large problem around the diversity of data and whether or not, certain types of, for example, going to the medical, whether or not certain types of human groups are properly represented in order to understand the diseases that each race might have. Like those are the things that I think the government needs to look at, and we have to have policy folks look at that to be able to manage our propensity to be very selfish. That's probably what my.
Got it. So shaped by policy, do you still see a really crucial role for government funding of innovation in the AI space?
In the AI space, I do at least in what I see, I do in order to fund areas that are not necessarily of interest by our commercial firms. There's certainly several national security, military related types of problem sets that they might get interested once they figure it out and they can sell back to the government, but they're certainly not going to be the ones investing ahead. I also think there's other areas that we tend to think this is a data problem, a software problem. I just got back from Taiwan. Their version of AI frothiness is AI chips. Everything's a hardware thing over there. Like I saw like 20 different system on chip startups. And some of them actually are, UCLA apparently has a quarter on the market there, by the way. But there's other areas that we need to actually fund in order for us to actually be competent in order to run these models. Like some of these models are going to cause a lot of energy to be used, right? Like we really need to think through some of those elements that actually need to be funded by the government, because I'm not sure. Oh, maybe some of the large companies like AWS are actually funding it to solve their own problem. But we use government to kind of juxtapose and balance out the funding.
So one major mechanism the government uses, which at Primer we're very familiar with, is the SBIR program. For those of you who don't know it, it's the Small Business Innovative Research Funding. It's $1 to $2 million to basically prototype out an idea, and the sponsor is someone on the government side. So it might be someone in the Navy, someone in the Air Force. They've got stuff they need. They apply for this funding. They get it, and then you have a competitive search for some company like Primer or someone else to try and build it. And it's what I love about it is you just talk directly to the customer. There's some actual group of people putting up their hands saying we want this problem solved. That's great. I love that. And working with them is just a breath of fresh air. You talk to even the operators as you're building the thing. That is not a normal experience for building things for the government. What I don't like is it takes 15 months, and it's what's called a waterfall approach. So you have to decide in advance, promise what you're going to do. They have milestones. There's going to be some box ticker giving you little drips of funding along the way as you meet those milestones. And even that can feel slow and awkward to develop something that's truly cutting edge. I think that's great for hardware. When it comes to software, that is tough. And then procurement and bureaucracy is a whole other kettle of fish. Do you see any, you've seen both sides of the fence. Do you see any big, just sitting there staring at us, opportunities for making that smoother, getting better value out of technology companies?
I mean, if you're talking about how SBIRs are run, I think there's probably some shifts that some of the agencies or some of the different organizations are trying to actually apply. So the Space Force and also the Air Force have their Tech by Strat by, which tries to get at this a little bit. I know the NASA program, they don't necessarily cause you to have to use 15 months. If you wanted to deliver early, you can. They have a lot less money, and so that's the challenge. But it is kind of, I think it's a culture change issue, like the new way of administering SBIR. So it's only been 5 years, possibly.
Yeah.
So it takes time to shift, and then you also have the Congress folks trying to push the government to change. So I think it's possible. It's going to take time. And the biggest thing I get concerned about in terms of using government programs like that is you end up becoming a project-based company and not a product-based company. And so you're not scalable, and you might be very disciplined to stay on your roadmap. Most aren't, based on what I can see.
Yeah, it's very hard to say no when someone says, I need this.
So it's $1.5 million or it's $2.5 million.
Which makes a big difference to small companies, which is the intended use. Okay, folks.
Are we allowed? Can I do a circle back?
Yeah.
So I just want to circle back something Ellen said. I was thinking about your question about when it makes sense. Why not just let industry do everything? And I was thinking about, for those you don't know, when we fly things in space, for the most part, NASA, the DoD, the Intel community, they fly a Rad 750 processor. It's a Pentium PC. It's like 30 years old, heavy, slow, uses a huge amount of power. And we started about 5 years ago a partnership with Qualcomm. And Qualcomm makes the majority of their money from cell phone chips, other than Apple, iPhones. That's the Snapdragon is the chip. They respin every year. They spend billions of dollars doing it. And so we developed this long-term strategy. We did radiation testing for them, helped them figure out the vulnerabilities of their chips that they started to care about, because it's not now just cell phones, it's car, drive-by-wire, infotainment. And so we discovered that we actually had some mutually beneficial interests, and we flew the Qualcomm Snapdragon in the helicopter on Mars, which would have been impossible with, a traditional, Rad 750, that type of chip. So I think that's an example where it's not an either or. In that case, it was a partnership, and it was a win-win. We get to, every time they respin, which we could never afford, they're actually building in things that we care about kind of on a non-interference basis. nobody would have done this because there's no profit in space compute chips. There's so few of them. And so I think there are spaces, that's not an exact AI application, although the chips now have AI engines and GPUs and all that of course didn't exist in space before. So I think that's an example of where a collaboration can kind of benefit both sides, industry and academia and federal labs.
With that, one example I would like to mention that perhaps if you have the right industry only, we're still having that big cameras that work where you're out and taking videos. I think it was a challenge that, the space releasing a payload that forced us to invent CMOS. CMOS basically had no use for industry at that time, but look at yourself when we have this. And so, as Dave mentioned, it's really the challenge that, the government sometimes takes for these big missions, forces us to think and invent. And then, translate it to industry and they make profit out of it.
All right, I'm going to ask one more provocative question here, and then I'm going to turn to you guys. So I hope someone is starting to cook something up that they want to ask. So you got about a minute to think about it. So let's go back to this China's playing the long game kind of super theme. When it comes to AI, is it even a long game? I mean, I feel like the winner might already be determined. It might be happening right under our noses. How can we, so this is more of an existential threat kind of, geopolitical existential threat kind of framing. Are we doing enough to even know where we are on the slope? Are we even behind? We asked this kind of on the phone before. I wanted to ask myself a provocative question, like, is my premise even right? Maybe we're not falling behind. But then it makes me think, well, how would you know? So who wants to take a crack at that?
Maurice.
I would submit that we're not necessarily falling behind. I know China does have a lot of money and they're putting a lot, they don't have the restrictions on data usage that we do, or at least that's what I understand. I'm not there, I don't know. But I think they are also constrained. I think they have their own constraints. They're not as wealthy as we are. It's the sovereign state that's pushing forward a lot of the research and development, and so maybe them as a nation, I can't really say that we're not on parity.
Well, how would you know? That's kind of the thing.
I'm not sure. I would,
I'm not sure either.
except for watching, watch TV. Maybe you can find out unless you're there.
Some people say just track the number of academic papers published, and I've actually crunched the data. They have surpassed us. Then you look at the quality of the research; it's nowhere near.
And hopefully we manage our quality too, right? Because there's some questions about our science papers these days.
Sure.
Okay, who's ready?
I'll go.
All right.
This is great. Again, first of all, thanks so much. It's great to have such a distinguished panel and that much talent on the stage with us today. So I'm grateful for it. Question is really, what are the areas that you believe are most vital to the national interest, most vital to the globe, that fall into the province of what really only government can do? And I'll kind of declare myself right here. I think there are some problems that are so complex, so non-obvious with respect to financial return, and ultimately so important that the private sector, as much as I'm a capitalist, will not touch with a 10-foot pole. And so I'd be interested, where are the areas that you think are most critical with respect to basic research, and we are significantly either underfunded or underfocused?
I'll kick it off. I'll say, and I'm obviously pretty biased. I think, space is the ultimate high ground. And, as we see in the Middle East, as we see in Ukraine, asymmetry is a huge thing. If you can defeat a $1 million a pop missile with I'll exaggerate, with a $200 drone, then, you're sort of winning in the long term. I think the big national systems that the three-letter agencies deploy in space are things that there's not in partnership with the big aerospace companies. There's a place that government, is going to stay in the role of funding those things. I think we are just beginning to understand what you can do with small sats, with AI capability, with, the ability to actually process data in space, make decisions in space, have full autonomy, and go for a long time without any human interaction. I think that's something that industry is all over. I see it all over the place, and I think there's a huge win to be there. But I think space has got to be in the top 5 of areas of concern going forward.
Now, I believe that the most important element to our national security is to be capable of bringing large army of unskilled, labor to areas that we can, using AI, bring it to the level that they can say that acceptable to do highly technical jobs. Issue we have is that things are changing so fast. You're going to see industries that are going to disappear. Millions of people need new jobs. They cannot go for another 1 year of training to get, jobs that they can do. AI can solve that problem. I think we need to challenge ourselves to do that.
I'll riff off of that a little bit. And you said something about security. I think our investment in security has to occur, not like military security, but I feel like these edge devices and artificial intelligence, like fakes, deep fakes, personas, like images that are pretending they're me, for example, on whatever virtual device, like that's scary. That's happening, and that needs to be combated. So how do we provide research and actually use AI for kind of counter measures?
And in each of those cases, you're saying that's a sweet spot for government to play a role.
So at least for the use case I'm saying, they hopefully they have a little bit more understand the patterns across.
It's funny because you hit 3 very different answers to the question. Yours is more of kind of the traditional solid, hey, there's some realms where it's just so hard to do anything there. You need government to set the mission. And you were saying, well, actually, area under the curve looking forward, the impact on our labor force could actually be the biggest crisis brewing. And AI can be a problem, but it can also be a solution. And you're proposing that government should represent the interests of all of us and make sure that the good happens and not the bad.
The government is supporting industry to develop tools.
Is it education or is it?
Not education, but that Boeing about 3 weeks ago announced that about 1,000 people will retire or something like that, and they needed workers. Workers, not just labor, but people that can come actually do coding, can do, the soldering, the things, and they couldn't find it. But AI through training, system like Vision Pro or something like that, they can really fill that gap by bringing those unskilled workers and empower them to do technical works that they could not imagine until they were before. That's what
I worry about the time scale of it. It's really hard to re-educate an entire population.
that's where AI can do.
Maybe it's assistive AI. The problem you're talking about is workers to do castings, forgings, all the hardware stuff, and we build things like ships. We can't build our ships. We can't build ourselves.
Yeah. The military for sure. Those applications, we don't. But ironically, it's white collar knowledge worker jobs that are going to get hit first. Is what I think is going to happen. And so I can imagine, do the same job but use AI as an assistant. I can imagine that being a path, but I don't know. I worry about how fast that can happen because it only takes a calendar year of economic mass turmoil to basically spoil the very institutions that make this all possible. What was the expression? Society is basically, 3 months of starvation away from just being gone, something like that. So, there's an analog in a broader economic sense Like, I don't know if we can keep the ship running if 40% of the people lose their job. But yeah,
I didn't mean to use AI to train. I meant use AI as an agent that enables you that if you haven't done, for example, certain highly technical job, immediately get to it and do it. As in, and you don't need to have a PhD in your own. Sometimes, the stuff that, maybe I can expand. At Caltech now, right now, they're working on a project to bring somebody that has never put a Lego system together. Have you seen those really complicated? They built a Concord, okay, for Legos. And for me, it takes about, I don't know, maybe 2 months. At the end, it's going to be not Concord, with assessment. So we are experimenting with bringing people who has never seen something in how to large language models to be able to do division of labor. And we are the best robot. I have fingers, I can see, I can smell, and I can make judgments. AI does prediction. I make the decision. That we have shortened the time that is unbelievable. That, you can actually assign tasks that the person without that, large language model, for example, he say, no, I cannot. So I'm hopeful.
well, what about in the military realm? This is something you keep a very close eye on.
We'll say about fewer people on ships. I mean, I was at Northrop Grumman Unmanned Systems for starting 20 years ago. I was a proponent for like nobody in the planes.
The same.
But humans want to be in planes, so the Navy still flies with people in planes. I think we're trying to figure that out, right? Like we have a recruiting problem right now, so maybe we'll figure out how to have less people on ships. I think the Dutch are actually building some ship that's going to have 8 people. That's it. Like not 18, not 20, not 20. I don't know if US Navy will adopt it. It's really hard to actually get groups of people that adopt technology. Right?
Yeah. Okay, who's ready for the next question? Andy.
Yeah. So I was reading the summary of the vetoes yesterday. Governor Newsom, and you probably saw he vetoed basically a regulatory regimen for AI application in California. And I think the question is really about if AI is kind of next arms race, how do you implement appropriate kind of guardrails, but also not stifle innovation?
When you say guardrails, do you mean safety guardrails or keep it within our borders, don't let the technology spread?
I was thinking more safety.
Safety.
Things get out of control, viruses being built. You can think of like mal-applications.
Yep.
But at the same time, if it's an arms race, I can imagine in Ukraine, it's like, well, there's certain things you can't do to respond to, Russian forces that would be, to kind of tie their hands. So how do you balance the ability to kind of, anyway, in many ways, let the free market of ideas prosper without having someone create a dirty bomb in their basement to just run that analogy down the road?
Take a crack.
I'm not a good answer.
How? Let me say the question. So what's the balance? I guess. And what are the
How do you
guardrails?
achieve the balance?
How do you achieve the balance? And well, maybe there's ways to. There definitely are personalities that we do have forces inside the military or even NSA. Like I'm sure they're looking at a variety of these types of problem sets and how do we deploy them might be helpful. I mean, we do have red teaming, right? And so how can we use some of those approaches to actually sift out some of the vulnerabilities? Play the bad cop and try to counter the AI. I mean, you're bringing up exactly my fear, which I mentioned earlier. It's like if this stuff gets into somebody, an evil person's hands, and Elon Musk is concerned about this, right? Like it could run amok. Like how do we manage that? I'm not sure, except for to have a group of good people, try to avoid it or cover it.
Yeah.
Too provocative. Too provocative. Come on. Too much.
Hi, my name is Gene Schwong, and great panel, by the way. I'm going to ask a techie, provocative question. Andy and I, we worked at a company here in Pasadena 24 years ago called Godi.com Overture. So we're like OG search folks. And we worked with a lot of Caltech folks that really, monetize the internet. I would say the reason the internet is free is because of the thing we invented here in Pasadena. I don't think LLM is AI. I think it's just souped up search or information retrieval with modern GPU, with an NVIDIA GPU, which Jensen Huang has created. AI is the way people describe AI, AGI. LLM is not enough, I think, ever hit AI. One person that I think is in the forefront of maybe crossing that chasm actually got her PhD here at Caltech, and that's Fei Fei. I think Fei Fei is one of the few rare scientists that I read her book and I followed her career, and I really think what she's on right now was what she calls spatial intelligence, and raising $250 million is something I think could possibly get us to that next step. Want to hear what you guys feel about LLM versus AI. I think it's totally mislabeled.
No, I like, this is a true nerdy, provocative question. Do we even have AI yet? That's the question.
No, we don't. No, we don't.
We don't have AGI, that's obvious, but
We don't even have an AI.
so the saying goes that AI is like the god of the gaps. Whatever seems too hard, we call it AI. And then we do that, we're like, no, that's not AI. The new thing is this thing.
Yeah.
So are we just kind of always creeping up? But we're actually nowhere close to what we should really be calling AI. Anyone want to take a strong opinion, hot take?
No, I guess I agree because just a couple of years ago it was ML. They have ML. Where do you say I
We're having a big data.
Now we have LLMs. It was language models, then LLMs, and so I don't know what the next thing is.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I am not at all an expert, but what I have noticed in my very long career and what I do is the labels and the craze of the new fad come first. And I fight this all the time with people say, oh, we just launched something and it's got machine learning and AI. And it's literally could be something I did in school in Fortran. Like, if this temperature gets too hot, turn off that subsystem. That has nothing to do with AI. And I think that there's kind of an analog there for what's going on. I think where my knowledge is weak is also that if it requires this enormous amount of training and still is fundamentally reliant on that training and often wrong, I don't think we're there yet. But I'm really a rookie at this, so I will hand my microphone back.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. LLM is just a language, correct? Not more than that. But I think machine learning and the future of AI depends on the data. And if you rely on really extensive training, there's something not right. In the meantime, the danger is that people are jumping ahead in order to answer that question by creating synthetic data. And that is dangerous because it can be trained to biases. And that's, I think, where I think that real AI should have.
Since no one's pushing back, just for the sake of it, I'll push back. So I was trying to solve the kind of problems that you solve with language data before we had even language models, let alone large language models. And it was so hard. I mean, when temperature reaches X, do Y, that's about where we were circa 2015. And the new thing that came along was called language model. The paper that described it, the transformer architecture we use is only published in 2017. We built the first version of this thing a year later, and it was released by Google in November 2018. So recent. And, I also didn't feel like, oh, AI is here. I felt like, oh man, this really hard thing that I was trying to solve in this pipeline is now so much easier. Because now, rather than a handcrafted algorithm, I could just take this model and put data in. and train it to do this thing. And so when the world changes, I can just use more data. That's great. I don't have to throw engineering hours at every single problem. I can throw data at it. That makes things a lot better. Then large language models came along, which is really, by the way, the exact same thing, just way bigger. Literally, it's the same thing. It's just more. I was really skeptical because GPT-3 came out. I tried it just like everyone else, and it was a pain in the ass. The thing, it was amazing if you wanted to generate a page of a fairy tale about unicorns. You know, that was what everyone was passing around on the internet. It was, look at these things; they can tell stories now. And I was like, so what? No one's going to pay me $1 million to give them a storytelling, goofball. And then my kind of like wake up moment was early 2022 when a new version of GPT-3 came out, so-called Instruct GPT. So the basic idea is they took this large language model and they put it through a kind of finishing school. They hired a ton of laborers around the world to basically tell it, say this, not that. It was literally behavioral training for the model. And the reason it changed everything for me as a builder of these systems is now I could just give it instructions. Before, I would have to give it text that it would continue. And so if I couldn't formulate a problem for it to solve as like, just predict the next word, and it's probably something like you've seen on the internet, then it was useless. And suddenly, basically overnight, it would do your bidding. Lots of quirks. You've probably heard of hallucinations. There's a plethora of new engineering problems to solve because of this. But, just like all technologies, it's evolving and evolving and evolving. We're in the industrialization phase of this new tool. And I'm not saying it has feelings and dreams that you can relate to, but the thing that really knocked my socks off was when I gave it a problem that required multi-step reasoning. That problem looked like absolutely nothing it could have ever seen. I invented a problem out of thin air, and it solved it. And it was like a really hard problem. Nowadays, it can solve problems that I can't solve. Like, definitely not. Randy and I, we were here on the campus a few months ago. There was a total nerd science moment on the Caltech campus where someone had posted on a wall a math problem. No context, no instructions. Just like, so we're like, oh, okay, well. And so we took a screenshot of it, sent it to GPT, and it solved it. And we were just like, wow, okay. This thing is maybe not AGI, no, but holy moly, what a tool. And the shape of that curve of capability is not flattening. It is still inflecting. So yeah, I agree with you. This is maybe not worthy of what we should be calling AI, but what a tool.
I do have a question around that. It seems like everything's in English. What about other languages?
Yeah, so my partner's Indonesian. The first thing I did with GPT at home was to send her a love poem in Indonesian, which infuriated her because I don't speak a word of it. And so it can translate, it can reason in other languages. Where it craps out, just for transparency, is low resource languages. So if a language is not well represented on the text of the internet, the capability tracks. So the lower the resource, the crappier it is. And that's a great example of a government problem to solve. If you care about those low resource languages, let's get that data. It might solve itself. The next generation of large language models is probably going to be using video and audio, of which we have abundant collections of low resource, conversation. It might just solve itself.
LLM is actually a misnomer on the language part. It's really training a sequence and pattern recognition. And that sequence could be any language. It could be computer language. Yeah. It could be peptide sequence. It could be RNA. It could be streams of bits for videos and audio.
Yeah.
So it's really a misnomer. But at the end of the day, it's only as good as the historical data that is human knowledge. Somebody has solved it before.
Yeah.
So it's magical to you, or it's magical to me because I don't know the answer. But it's really just let me Google it for you, or let me LLM it for you, grabbing at historical knowledge.
That's fair. Yeah. Yeah. I don't assign any magical value to it. It's just incredibly useful.
It's very useful. John, last question.
Last question. Who wants to be provocative? Provocative?
Provocative.
All right.
I've been working I was in China in the 80s. I started working in this space at Los Alamos in 1995. I've met a lot of people and worked with a lot of people who are in the dark space and dark, what we used to call dark sky. I don't know what you call them, but
Wait, what's dark space?
classified,
Gotcha.
highly classified.
Behind the veil.
Yeah, behind the veil, that's called. And I don't even know what they're, I don't have the clearances, even though I've worked with them to bring stuff into the market. My concern is that we have some very, Peter Thiel, Palantir, Elon Musk, they have as much money as they could ever want to use. And Palantir is a big defense contractor. Peter Thiel, we know his politics. I'm wondering about how it's getting to the point where we can't compete without the supercomputers, without the kind of servers that only Zuckerberg and maybe Bezos can afford. And that concerns me on the academic level, and it also concerns me on the small business balance and the political level, frankly. So I don't know, how would you
So to
control
rephrase,
that?
tell me if I've got this right. The concern here is that the resources necessary to play the game at all in this AI revolution are in the hands of a few people and companies that
That's right.
you're very suspicious of.
Yeah.
All right. Who
That's-
wants to take that?
I'll try. I thought we tried to talk through that earlier. In that that's a function that government really should play. I think the challenge the government has is sometimes they're not well informed. They need to be educated, and so if we can work on that, I think then they can play their role better. But that's certainly those are conversations, at least around the policy wonks over in DC. They're very concerned they have these conversations, and I think we as citizens probably need to have those conversations.
When you were in the Navy, did you have any interactions with Earl Systems? The Earl
Systems they might have, but
shipbuilding group?
yes, but not directly because.
Because they were early into intelligence analysis of data, petabyte a day. This is 15, 20 years ago. And trying to make sense out of it. And they've evolved their work into some pretty substantial processes, I guess. We'll have to talk about all.
It's not that big.
Anyway, thank you, Ellen.
So, because
Just glad to just say, I think part of our problem at academia is that it's a giant black hole that sucks our greatest minds into our industry and they disappear.
Yeah.
But so creativity, I'm not saying that they're not going anywhere else, but that's a major portion of it. They offer huge salaries and things that basically they cannot resist. Okay. So 18 years old, suddenly $300,000.
Yeah.
You won't. And that's where the problem is. They don't go to a PhD or something that challenges their mind to come up with new ideas to have societal actions. That's where we're going to lose. There's a lot of can play this way. So the real concern is about morality, really. Is it money? Is it service to the humanity? Where do we draw that line and how do we balance that? And I guess I really appreciated what all of you have said today. So thank you so much for being here.
Although not as doom and gloom, I mean, I do see a lot of young people decide maybe they go and make money, but they kind of rotate back into government. At least I'm in this defense innovation space where you know, that they're, who was it? Palmer Luckey said, you know, I'm sick and tired of doing search engine stuff. Like he wanted to do something impactful. Yes, he has lots of money, but he did start his career at Army Research Lab. So.
Folks, it's time to wrap it. Please thank our panelists.
Thank you.
John, thanks so much. I appreciate it. This is a heck of a panel. I appreciate all your thinking. You know, and I was struck by a handful of things that came up. I had to remind myself that I wasn't on the panel, so I needed to keep my mouth shut. But, you know, these are the topics that we live and breathe kind of every day at Primer. You know, the notion, for example, of AI safety. And what does that actually mean in a world where you have competitors and adversaries moving very quickly down the track? And there are things that they can and will do that, you know, we can't and won't. And it really, as a consequence of that, one of the things we worry about is really speed. I actually worry less about safety because it's actually a fundamental value. And if you can either look at anything that the DoD puts out or, the president's folks have put out with respect to responsible AI, we're putting in the right frameworks to think about this. The challenge with implementation is we can get powerful tools in the hands of customers in a matter of days or weeks, But in many cases, and folks in this room similarly engaged in this business know, it can take you 2 years to work your way through to get there. And as John points out, you've got a SBIR program, which is kind of an interesting thing from a standpoint of other people's money used to fund solving a problem. But most companies lose money on every SBIR, and it creates effectively a value of death for emerging tech companies. With respect to your comment about the, you now have companies and individuals whose wealth rivals that of nation states, and in many cases have the ability to deploy more resource against these problems and therefore kind of drive policy and approach. That's why I think it is vital for the government to really focus on areas that effectively maintain some level of control, which is, I don't think it's a great world when you have to beg, cajole, or influence Elon Musk with respect to Starlink support for Ukraine, right? And so I do think it's incumbent on government, which means it's incumbent on us to make sure we put on the table those policy matters that are fundamental, to us. And we've got a Congress that actually represents that. Actually, though, one thing I am much more sanguine about is the fact that we are grappling much more with the problem set today. And am I worried about the brain drain from academia to private sector? Yes, but as folks have called out, there is a lot more back and forth. And to your point, the training, the education is vital. The reason that so many people have these opportunities in private sector is because the education they get. In this notion that you can get a comparable education because you're working at X or you're working at SpaceX, that may be true for 1/100th% of the population, but for everybody else, that fundamental education is profoundly important. And I do think you're going to see much more back and forth or concurrency with respect to people who are both working at academic institutions and also working with private sector. And I think the beauty of that is it actually starts to pull together what had formerly been extraordinarily important, but almost completely separate tracks, in the world we live in. Mayor Gordo said to me just before the end of the panel that if you want to get political action around some of these problems, for example, job displacement, one of the things we really should be thinking about is articulating the opportunities for technologies to either upskill or retrain folks, much more quickly, so that displacement or that disruption is not nearly as jarring as it has been in earlier technological ages. And certainly with respect to the software, I think the potential is there. But if it's not put on the table as an imperative, you're not going to get the support and you're not going to get the change. The last thing I was struck by was kind of what I think is valid commentary around kind of the liberal or excessive use of the word, AI. It's magic pixie dust. That if you want to increase the valuation of your company or you want to solve your problems, you just sprinkle some AI on it and away you go. But there's a part of it which I actually think is somewhat beside the point, right? Which is, the 30 years I've been involved in building technology companies, there has been kind of the hype in vague, ambiguous use of language, right? Not terribly accurate, but we are at the dawn of a new age. And if you just take AI out of the way, you think about the capabilities that exist today because of a confluence of factors, right? An abundance of compute, a foundation, with the internet, the amount of folks connected to it, the data that's produced every day. We now can take these techniques and algorithms and increasing abundance of data and compute and do things that we never could before. And ultimately, if we're able to harness those capabilities and make ourselves more productive, advance the pace of the discovery of knowledge, and allow people to be much more effective in their jobs, frankly, I don't care what you call it, right? It almost doesn't matter. And in fact, the building blocks of AI have been around, certainly in academia, for nearly 70 years as being described as AI. And I do think underneath it all, the smoke, the hype, in some points it's just repackaging of capabilities that software companies have been using forever. There is something profound in the combination of algorithms and capabilities and just the increasing abundance of compute that does make this effectively a game-changing moment for us. And, I have a feeling 20 years from now, if we look back at this age, we will look at yes, the hype and the smoke, but how many things that we previously thought were impossible that we achieve every single day. And certainly at Primer, our goal is to take these capabilities as they exist, our expertise, put them together in products that these most important institutions that we serve become much more effective at doing their job, and including the most critical components, so that they can not only be more effective in their job, but in so doing, make the world a safer place, much better equipped to the challenges that face us today. Many of them also have their roots in the same technological progress, right? It's, in the early stages, bad actors often win the early innings of new technologies because they bend them to their will, and they don't have any of the same constraints, and they have very obvious motives. But if you take the long view and we move more quickly, all of a sudden these tools can be deployed for forces of good. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming out to see us today, spending time with us. I hope it was a very good use of your time. You learned something of value from these extraordinarily capable people who have given some time with us today. I also want to thank the mayor. It is incredibly important to have dedicated, committed public servants who wake up every morning and think about how they can provide help, opportunity, advantage for the people that live in the communities that they serve. So Mayor Gharib, thank you very much for being with us today. And then I want to thank Mr. Andy Wilson, networker extraordinaire. I want to thank my team, some of the folks who have traveled far and wide to be here. Thanks so much. You're more than welcome to hang out for a bit. Actually, one bit of bookkeeping. Ellen, as you were speaking, there was someone in the back who actually had a note of frustration on his face. He was a classmate of yours at Wharton. When you were talking about autonomous flight, he was a Hornet pilot. So he took umbrage at that remark. And I told him if autonomous flight was available when you went to flight school, you would have probably found yourself on the beach down in Coronado with Colin. So, yeah, thanks for coming out. So thank you all very much. Great to have you here. We're excited to be part of this community.